So we want to switch gears a little bit here to the ongoing sexual assault investigations. So this might be more pertinent to Matt and Ananya. But as SMOGs, at the time that Damascus and Seneca Valley and Gaithersburg, those events occurred, can you talk a little bit about what conversations happened within the board with respect to those events? Was there information that the board knew before the public about any of this? What was like the general dynamic with those conversations?
That's all in Anya's term, so I think she can speak to that.
Yeah, so absolutely. A lot of the questions that, a lot of the conversations that did happen during my time on the board, I unfortunately can't fully disclose. Just for full transparency, I want to share that. But I will say it did change a lot of the conversations that were being had about proactive approaches to these system-wide ideas that we've always talked about, but not necessarily taken a completely proactive approach to. So for example, a culture of respect between students and amongst students was something that was discussed and Dr. Smith talked about significantly. Also, talking about a holistic review of our sports programs, which I'm sure you all saw, to talk about the types of relationships that students have with each other who are on these teams or in these groups. You know, it doesn't even have to be limited to sports. It can really be any group of students. Thinking about how we can proactively address possible strains in these communities to ensure that such events never take place. It was surely something quite difficult to deal with as a system and as a community, as a Montgomery County community, especially for the community at Damascus High School. But it really brought to light kind of what systemic changes we need to be thinking about as a system. And I will say, like, as a board member observing the process, the school system really got to the core, really tried to get to the core of the issue, as opposed to just trying to address one singular instance, because in reality we don't know if this has happened before or if it's a common occurrence. And I think that that's something that to the public, even Dr. Smith, our superintendent, really expressed a commitment to, is ensuring that all of our students' safety is protected in a proactive manner, so that we don't have to come back and necessarily address the we don't have to have, students don't have to experience the trauma that comes with such an instance. So we shouldn't have to address these issues after they've already happened. We should be preventing them, is what kind of came out of those conversations. And I definitely think, like, this, as a student board member, I really appreciated that, because it really demonstrated the system's shared commitment to student safety.
For sure. So I guess the Wilmer Hale report that was commissioned after the Damascus incidents, do you think that something like that is in order now based on what's been coming out recently, or is that not needed yet?
I definitely think that a similar assessment could be done to better understand the pervasiveness of. So just to clarify, you're referring to the allegations of sexual assault and harassment by students.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry.
District,
yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think that there needs to be a system-wide assessment of how a lot of this comes down to individual administration as well, right? So in reality, the system is overseeing 207 schools with over 160,000 students. So I don't necessarily know how such an assessment could be outlined. The system has even changed since I've been on the board, even though it's only been 2 years. But it would be important to really think about how we are holding staff and administrators accountable to ensuring that it's not only about incidences not happening, because the reality is a lot of things happen under the rug, which is what has been demonstrated by this Instagram account with all of these stories. But it has to be that every single student feels safe when they walk into the building. That's the reality that we need to create. And I believe it is in order for the system to assess, maybe not in the same exact way they did for the other report, but in a manner that is most effective for this particular issue. So I know that's a bit vague, but to clarify, the board isn't really the body that engages in the direct work, like assessment and review of these system-wide problems. It's the superintendent who brings this information to the board. So that's why I'm not able to give you a very clear outline of what I think that such a study or analysis would entail, if that makes sense. So
Yeah,
unless Matt or Nate have anything to add in that realm.
I question whether, and we sort of talk about this in the op-ed, oftentimes the response to crises is to study it and collect more data on things that we already know. So we know that this is a pervasive problem in our schools and that clearly it's not being addressed, right? People don't make these Instagram accounts and come forward like this if they feel like justice has been done. And importantly, they wouldn't need to even come forward if we were teaching students consent and respect at an early age, so that the sexual assault and the harassment and the predation isn't happening in the first place. So in my view, yeah, I think MCPS has fallen super short, and what we're seeing now is the explosion. It's what happens when you don't address an issue. People get frustrated and they turn to whatever outlets they possibly can. The system has dragged its feet on stuff like embedding consent into the health curriculum, creating an anonymous online reporting form for sexual harassment and assault. I think our health curriculum needs to go way further, way earlier in talking about consent and talking about respect. And I think only then can we say that we've actually addressed these issues. Studying them is not nearly enough, although probably couldn't hurt to hear more feedback from students. Never hurts to hear more feedback from students on how the system can do better.
Yeah, I think an analysis to build off of what Matt was saying would be more as a measure of accountability than a measure of trying to understand the issue better, because like he said, we all know what the problem is, and hopefully the system and administrators at schools understand it too. But I believe that an analysis the analysis that happened in the subsequent report after the Damascus High School incident was something that increased individual administrator accountability and other school professional accountability as well. So taking this comprehensive look would be beneficial, while simultaneously also listening to these individual stories and taking action in response. So it's kind of a combination of the two, but it's one of the interesting dynamics with such a big system is how do you manage at both an individual and system-wide level justice for all students. Definitely a challenge that I observed when I was on the board. By no means excuses the problems that we see in our schools, but hopefully students can propose some creative ways to combat that challenge. So
yeah, I completely agree with every single thing that Matt and Ananya said. And I think a big thing for the future, just as Matt mentioned, is teaching our young children consent and respect. I know that's one thing that both, all three of us have pushed on. And it's a matter of being proactive and not reactive in these situations, not just sending out an email to staff, parents, and students saying you'll look at it and work on it, but actually doing things and saying that and putting out a press release with action steps that you're taking right there. I mean, it's as simple as that. And everything that Matt mentioned, it shouldn't be a conversation of 2020. I mean, this should have been done decades ago, but we're here now, and we just have to keep pushing on this issue to make sure that we hold this system accountable for its failures and being proactive on sexual assault.